welcome to another episode of the Purvis Versus podcast. My name is Eric Purvis, and I'm a registered massage therapist, course creator, CE instructor, and curriculum advisor for evidence-based massage therapy education. This episode features another CE instructor as I welcome Marcus Blumensaat. We discuss the roles and responsibilities of being an evidence-based CE instructor as we explore the difficulties in challenging the status quo and current practice standards for massage therapy, despite a wealth of contradictory evidence. If you enjoy this episode, please share it on your social media platforms. Purvis Versus can also be found on YouTube, so please check us out there and be sure to like and subscribe. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for being here for another episode of Purvis Versus. Today I have Marcus Blumensaat, a colleague and another CE provider here in the wonderful, beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. So thanks for being here, Marcus. Now just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you just said, I'm a registered massage therapist with private practice in Victoria, BC, and also continuing education educator. And then I guess personally, big family man. I have a wonderful wife, 2 daughters, and my own time away from work other than family. I'm a mountain biker, and my weird sort of personal hobby is I'm also a watch enthusiast. And yeah, that's about me.
I love that you were the watch enthusiast, because when we got together for coffee that time, we were commenting on each other's watches. You definitely know more about them than I do. I love watches, but I thought that was such a cool thing, because you don't really meet too many people that actually notice watches or actually know anything about them, whether it's brands or types or what's. Yeah, and you have how many do you have? You have a whole bunch of different watches, don't you?
Well, to clarify, they're all what I would call entry level. So they're not expensive watches. I'm on the very entry level. Some of them I've had for years, gifted to me by my dad or whatever. But yeah, I have I think I have 9 watches. But yeah, they're all entry level.
Okay, they'll do
Yeah.
the job. Always makes me think. Every time I think of people that like watches, I always think of that scene with Christopher Walken in
Yes.
Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone
Yeah.
listening can
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that's great. Thanks, Marcus, for being here.
Yeah.
So I get, yeah, the reason I wanted to bring you here was just just to chat about some things. I know we have a lot of stuff in common in terms of the way the way we want the profession to go, the way we think continuing education should be. But just you're relatively new-ish, I guess, into the CE realm. Just tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of what was your motivation behind wanting to be a CE provider.
Yeah. Well, I guess it just started from my own journey as a practitioner. I was just always fairly keen on knowledge and information, and so I was always questioning what I knew and if that was maybe more right or less right than anything else. And so I just started taking courses, and back earlier, say 15 years ago, there wasn't much social media. There was a little bit, but mainly it was courses and blogs. And so I just started reading those, and my knowledge base started growing. And then social media came on the scene really more strongly, as well as podcasts. And basically, it just got easier to access sort of all the world leaders in musculoskeletal healthcare. And they were writing blogs for free. They were on podcasts. You could listen to them talk for an hour for free. And it was just like, all of a sudden, it was like this endless at your fingertips information. And I was soaking it in and sort of changing the way I think and practice according to this information, because a lot of it was very different than what I was taught, because information evolves and science evolves and we move forward. And I just kept soaking it up and changing the way I practice. And eventually it got to the point where there was all this information. It's so easy to access. And it was so different from people's base educations and very different from how I would say the majority of all healthcare professionals, musculoskeletal healthcare professionals, were practicing. So I not limiting it to massage therapists, but all healthcare practitioners. And truthfully, I felt like the gap was so big, I wanted to contribute to bridging the gap from where people were to where the latest research was. And so I just decided to start making a course and start teaching and sort of try and, you know, join the group of educators who are trying to move musculoskeletal healthcare in a more up-to-date, evidence-based place. And so that was really my motivation, I guess you could say, is just wanting the care that people receive when they go to someone in practice, the care they receive to be the most modern, up to date, and based on scientific evidence that it could be. Because I think that for the most part, there is still quite a gap out there between people's sort of base educations they're getting and then how they're practicing, and a lot of continuing education that's out there is pretty outdated as well, in my opinion. So, yeah, that was the motivation, is just basically to move musculoskeletal healthcare in a more modern, up to date, evidence based way. And so, yeah, plugging away with it and enjoying it.
I love it. Yeah, I mean that's a motivation for a lot of us, and that was my motivation too. Is when you start to see what you were taught and what you had learned in other courses versus then when you take a look at the research and take a look kind of best practice stuff, you realize there's this total incongruency between it, and you think this doesn't make any sense. It's like this information, some of this information, that we're learning has been out of date for 40 years, but it's still the
Yeah.
common narrative and the common practice, and it can be frustrating, right? Because you want to you start to realize that people are coming in to see you, well-meaning healthcare providers just don't have that information, and they're basing treatments or treatment plans or self-management strategies on information that doesn't have any evidential support.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's great. So one thing I want to ask you though too is because we've all of us that have gone through this kind of evolution, this journey from our base level education to taking a deep dive into the research and the evidence, and then trying to make sense of that and translate that into our practice, and then trying to translate that into something that's digestible to learners, the
hmm
people that pay us and to attend our courses or listen to our podcast, whatever it might be. Was there like a specific course you took, or a blog you read, or a podcast you heard, or something that really inspired you and got you thinking, "Oh, this is very different from what I thought."
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I started questioning my bias, which my bias coming out of university with a degree in kinesiology, I was very biomechanical. Um, you know, there was a proper way to have proper biomechanics, everything, da da da. So I was very symmetry in biomechanics. And then I just started questioning that by looking at things out in the real world and questioning it. Started reading some stuff. I'm like, oh, there's some other people who are saying biomechanics aren't that big a deal and posture isn't that big a deal. And so I was starting to get a little bit of affirmation of my doubts. And then I took Greg Lehman's course. Um, for the first time, I've taken it 3 times. The first time I took it, and it was like it was made for me. It was the whole course basically confirmed all of my questions and my doubts about what I had been taught and the way I had been practicing. And the whole weekend, I was just having aha moments after aha moment after aha moment. And that was the true tipping point where everything changed for me, and I just had such a fire lit underneath me, and I was like, aha. Because for those who don't know, Greg is one of the most knowledgeable MSK healthcare professionals and educators around the evidence, around research. And so here he was presenting these points backed up by so many studies. I mean, he's just an encyclopedia of every study that's pretty much ever been done. And here he was backing up all these doubts I had, and he was confirming them with evidence. And but he does an effective job of I think he's a really good, what I would call maybe fence sitter. He's not saying certain one way is right, one way is he's just saying a lot of the time we just don't know. The evidence doesn't know, you know, what's best, but it's certainly not saying this, and so yeah, that was the course, that was the moment. And then from then on, it was a really, really quick, good slippery slope. into the evidence and more so, and changing my bias, completely changing the way I practice, completely changing the way I speak with people, completely changing the narratives I say. Yeah, that was the course.
Nice. Greg's
Yeah.
course was great. I think I first met Greg in 2016 because our old clinic, we used to host him. I think you probably
Mhm.
attended a couple of times that we brought him here. And so I've probably seen him been at his course probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 times, all the times we brought him here or to the
Yeah.
West Coast, and seeing him in other places too. And yeah, I really like how he presents things, and because it's all about kind of questioning what you think rather than just these hard and fast rules,
Mm-hmm.
which is great because humans don't follow rules, and so why should our rehab follow, for the most part, follow these very specific, protocols? It doesn't matter as much, and that's what I liked about it. I felt like learning his stuff provided more freedom, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
more curiosity into how you practice versus things have to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think the for me one of the biggest changes from him, but also from my own sort of investigation doubts, but he confirmed, is his way, and now I guess you could say my way of looking at people is a lot more positive. I think the older way to practice is looking at people like they're broken and they need to be fixed. And I think Greg's way, he uses the term, movement optimist. And I like that. Basically, it's just a much more optimistic way of looking at the human being. We are incredibly adaptable. And for the most part, once you learn about the science, it shows that all postures are basically normal and okay, and most biomechanics are fine, and you know it just is a lot more positive, and so you end up empowering people and enabling them versus scaring them and taking things away from them, i.e., oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you got to be careful of doing this. So that's another big takeaway from that first course, and now the way I look at the human as well.
So much of the way that we're educated, and I'm going to say, like, I would say across the board, it's a generalization, but I would, based on my experiences and based on people I talk to and things that are still common out there, you go on social media and you see the things that people are talking about. Most of the way that we are taught or educated or think is more about disability care. It's more what's wrong with the person and how do we fix
Mhm.
it rather than what's capable or what's possible with the person. I've liked the idea of thinking more about the ability rather than disability because, more often than not, right, people hurt, but we don't really know why, but we can try and do some things that make them feel better and we don't have to blame them. And because
Yeah,
oftentimes it becomes blaming, doesn't it?
yeah, definitely. And I mean, with almost all things, it's you're picking out something that's wrong with someone. But the thing is, it's quote unquote wrong, because this is the whole point: is the evidence. There is no evidence for a lot of these things we're telling people are wrong, bad, poor, faulty. We use these words, and yet there isn't an actual scientific evidence base to say these things are bad, poor, faulty, wrong. So we're fixing these things that we're telling people are wrong, when in actual fact they're not really wrong.
Where's that come from? I've always wondered that. Like, do you know? Have you ever? What are your thoughts on that? Like, where do these things come from, where we like make stuff up?
Well, I have a theory, um,
Tell
and
us.
it's I think in the past, I'm going to take, for instance, posture, posture, and symmetry, and biomechanics. Those three things, because they're three of the most common things that get blamed for people's pain or quote unquote disability. So the reason I think they came to be in the position they are, which is probably the most frequently blamed thing for people's problems, is because it's really freaking easy to look at someone and see they're asymmetrical. Like I could, 100 people could stand in front of me and I could pick apart their posture. I could find all sorts of asymmetries. I could strength test them from side to side and they'd all be asymmetrical. So it's dead easy, takes no time. to look at someone and see asymmetries. It takes no time to look at someone and see quote unquote poor posture or bad posture. It takes no time to test someone's strength from side to side and pick apart asymmetry. Oh, you're weaker on this side. That's the problem. So it's really simple. I think that's why it probably took hold. That's my guess.
I love it. Simplicity is, I
Yeah.
mean, we want to have these hard and fast rules. And there is, the posture thing is a thing that it does drive me a bit crazy because people hold on to that as being the be all and end all. And the thing I always want people to understand is, posture is an option. It's not a rule,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think, I shared on my Facebook page a while ago. I think you commented on it. It was like back in the 50s, like the chiropractors at the time in the US were having like Miss Perfect posture competitions or something as a way to kind of sell their professionalism and showing how important they were as healthcare providers. And I think it's just hilarious, like a beauty pageant.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good laugh.
Yeah, I love that. I was like, I can't even believe it's a thing. Like, it sounds like something that you couldn't even make that up.
Yeah.
So yeah, posture is a big one too, and it's still common. Some of the work I've been able to do, and people I've talked to in different colleges around the country, that's still the main thing is all about correcting posture through whether it's through manual techniques, stretching, strengthening, sitting, standing, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
people listening realize that it's as important, not as exciting as it's been made out to believe, but
Yes.
it is interesting though. Hey, like these types of things, and we could we can focus on posture. There's a million of them out there. These types of things, though, it's amazing how those are still so commonly perpetuated as a myth or as a belief in all the MSK professions, despite the fact that there is so much evidence and so many other people out there, not just you and I, but dozens or hundreds of other people out there, basically saying no, that's not a big deal.
Hmm.
But it still seems like I don't know how many people we need to say, don't worry all the time about posture. It doesn't matter all the time as much as you think it does. Like, when's it going to get to that tipping point? I don't know. I always thought it was going to be a lot sooner than it is because I've been at this for 8 years or so now, and I thought there'd be big changes, but I don't see big changes, unfortunately. Small changes.
Yeah. I mean, it's so established and ingrained around the world in every musculoskeletal healthcare profession, though, and not just in general medicine, in general society. Like, it could be one of the simplest medical beliefs that's out there is that posture is got there's good and bad posture. That's one got to be one of the most ingrained beliefs. So to change that belief, to change that worldwide, is not going to be overnight. That's going to take time.
Oh yeah, because you're changing society, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
you're changing culture. It's just yeah.
Yeah.
But at the very least, though, at the very least, would be my hope would be that new grads entering the profession or even existing people would start to not emphasize as much. And I think sometimes it's a fine line between not just calling everything bullshit
Hmm.
because then no one listens because you're like telling them that they're wrong. But I just think it's a less wrong option for people to not reinforce those beliefs rather than
Hmm.
just completely throwing them out the window. Just don't reinforce them
Yeah. Well,
and
and the
not
thing,
realizing how harmful potentially they could be.
hmm and this kind of you can segue into another point about, say, posture. Or we can substitute a lot of different things in here. Is in it. I'm not saying that someone couldn't feel better if they changed their posture. In fact, I think it's great. Sometimes changing your posture can feel incredible. I do it with people sometimes. I'll say, hey, try doing this with your pelvis. Oh, yeah, the pain's gone. Great. Well, why don't you try and hold yourself like that for a while until your pain calms down, and then go back and try your normal posture and see if it's all right and tolerated. So I think changing posture is a great thing, but it's the narrative that goes with it. That's what it, and that's put any other thing in for posture, call it biomechanics, whatever. It's all the narrative that goes with it. So I'm not saying any posture is bad, but it can be very helpful to change postures, and it can be great, bring great effect about for a person. It's just the narrative you tag on with it. You don't need to label their original posture bad. It's just for the time being, it's sensitive. So let's change to this other one for a little while, and then we'll let the sensitive posture structures involved in that calm down, and then we'll go back and try it. So yeah, I think it's also important. I always want to clarify whenever I say anything about, say, posture or passive modalities. It's not often a problem with the modality or changing someone's posture. It's the narrative that goes with it that's really the main issue for me.
I would agree 100%. I'm the same way. If it's more about the beliefs that you have or the beliefs that are being imparted onto the person, and how is that impacting their quality of life? Is it making them feel weak? Is it making them feel broken? Is it focusing more on disability rather than ability?
Yeah.
And I like what you said there too about, yeah, sometimes you do want to change posture. Sometimes you want to alter how people are standing, sitting, moving, because, like you said, I think the area might be sensitive. Not Doesn't mean it's broken. Doesn't mean it's damaged necessarily.
Yeah.
And that is a point though that I feel is missed or is overlooked a lot of times when people have these conversations. Like, if we have these conversations, people hear like, "Oh, you're telling me that posture is garbage and it's useless." Well, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that an optimum posture for most people is not doesn't need to be achieved for them to feel better.
Right. Yeah.
But
And
maybe
that,
and see if it helps them. If it helps them, then that's a new option for them. It's
yeah.
an option, not a rule.
Yeah. And I think, with, again, if we're just going to stay on posture, again, the science, there's no evidence saying there is an optimum posture. I mean, that's the point.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Maybe if there was evidence that said so, then we would be arguing for an optimum posture. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't know. So tell us a little bit. We'll kind of segue this into telling us a little bit more about your course.
Hmm.
What's it called? What are you teaching?
Yeah. It's called Exercise and Movement Prescription in Modern Clinical Practice. And I mean, the name's a little bit deceiving, in that, you know, the majority of the course is about sort of movement and getting people moving and giving them exercise or movement. But half the course maybe is also about things like the biopsychosocial model, person-centered care, evidence-based practice, um, these more global topics that are all hot topics, discussion points around the MSK healthcare world around the globe by sort of the world leaders. So I go into those as well at quite some depth. Pain science and communication, all these things we cover in the course, and I always have a little slant towards relating them. I integrate them by kind of relating them to exercise and movement, call it prescription, as that is the title of the course. So I really do work it back to that. But yeah, and then we of course cover exercise and movement prescription in depth, because I think for most educations, the focused hour wise and classroom hours is on more passive therapies. And there isn't as much time put to communication. There isn't as much time put towards exercise and movement prescription. So that's what my course is trying to do, is fill that gap, because I for sure think there's enough time spent in educational programs on the passive modality side of things.
Yeah, and there's not really much at all out there really given for the movement or the rehab science aspect. Is it? It's usually
Mhm.
very linear stretching and strengthening type things with following reps and sets or along a specific protocol. At least that's how I remember it, and from what I've heard from recent grads, that seems to still be kind of the same case.
Mhm. Yeah.
I know in your course you have your gold nuggets. You're learning. And I love that idea of like, these are some of the things you need to get. Do you want to share what some of those are? Like, if someone was going to take your course and say they listen to this podcast and wanted to take your course, what would be a couple of the key things that they would bits of information you'd like them to get from the course?
Yeah, that's well, the gold nuggets are often like these little practical things, like little like exercises I've found to be like really good for certain things. So those are sprinkled in. Main takeaways from the course, you know, listen to people. I go on and on about that. Listening to people, validating their experience. Um, I think major part I harp on throughout the course repeatedly is I think the number one job of any healthcare practitioner is to rule out red flags. Um, so I find that vitally important. That's what we should all of us in medicine, medical field, healthcare field, be focused on. And if you're picking up on something, you need to refer people on. Uh, and then other than that, if red flags have been ruled out, it's really about like the big take homes are reassure people that they're not broken, and then empower them and help them get moving or help them get back to doing the things they love. Maybe they've given up the things they love because they're worried, because they've been told they shouldn't do them, because they think they're going to make things worse. And so they've stopped doing the thing they love to do or the things they love to do. So I think the biggest take home of my course is once red flags have been ruled out, you know, try to empower people, try and get them to feel um, more positive about their situation and try and if it has to be gradual, try and gradually get them back doing the things that they would like to be doing. um, I guess that would be the quickest little summary of the take home.
Yep, in 2 days, if you could, that's I know it's hard to summarize all the things because I know your course is quite comprehensive, and I mean, you
Yeah,
said you covered, all the biopsychosocial evidence based, person centered care, pain science, communication strategies, all those things, which is all really the stuff that it seems to be that's where the evidence is going towards
yeah.
is more towards these kind of behavioral sciences, kind of relationship sciences, psychological science type stuff,
Mhm.
which is I think that's going to be you know moving forward. It's that's going to if the profession or any MSK professions want to follow the evidence like they should. I mean, it's even in our competency documents that you have to follow evidence-based practice. It moves you away from the pathoanatomical tissue-based model and more towards these kind of behavioral science stuff.
Mhm.
So I think it's really encouraging to know that CE providers like yourself out there are trying to do that, and
Mhm.
hopefully, along the way that'll get picked up by more people, and hopefully the stakeholders in our profession will eventually decide that they need to do something
Yeah,
to move
I
us
mean,
forward. Yeah.
yeah, and that's ultimately what it'll come down to, in the end. But yeah, like I think that's a neat thing the way you sort of were introducing it, and I think what's really was has been fascinating for me and mind blowing in my journey in the last few years is learning how the science is showing all of the passive modalities that therapists, clinicians do to people, and they all work in the short term. They all help people in the short term, and they all help each other generally about the same in the short term. And what's fascinating is they're not that specific. So, there's been really neat studies done comparing clinicians who are trying to do something very specific. They think they're fixing something specific versus a group of therapists control group that's just doing a general something. And it ends up that both groups help people about the same. So, it's showing that all these passive things that are being done to people or with people, they're all effective in the short term, which is great. Um, but they're not very specific. And, where a lot of the benefits coming from is just having a therapeutic alliance, just someone being there, someone listening, someone caring, someone being with you on your journey. There's so much positive clinical outcome that comes from that. So, I think that's like you say, where a lot of the evidence is leading is, putting more time into getting better at listening and communicating, coaching, helping coach people through, versus fixing people, so yeah.
Yeah, I like to change the narrative from being like a facilitator of wellness or for a facilitator of well-being, um, rather than the fixer of your problem. I think if we can just like adopt that kind of mindset, it changes everything about how we interact and the things we say and the things we do and the expectations that we have of ourselves and the expectations that the person in front of us has.
Mhm.
changes dramatically. And I'm sure you've noticed that in your practice. I noticed that in my practice too. And that's stuff I always want to emphasize to people in courses is that, they're like, what are you doing with your hands? And how do you do this? And how do you do that? And I'm always like, don't ask me, ask the person on the table
Mhm. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it doesn't matter
Mhm.
what we do. It matters how the person experiences it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and how they experience you. Yeah, I was actually on another podcast I recorded, which should be coming out probably just before this one or just after this one. We were talking, I believe we were talking about that about the and other professions like say like in psychology and psychotherapy, how it's the same thing with them is that they have different interventions and different ideas that they grasp onto. They have their own different acronyms of things they do, but the neither one works better than the other. It all comes down to the relationship between the clinician and the therapist and the person seeking your care.
Mhm. Yeah. Exactly.
So why would it be different for us, right?
Yeah. Wouldn't be.
I'd say the only difference with us is people who come to see us usually want to have their hand, want to be touched. They want to have hands
Mhm.
on. They want to have
Mhm.
feel us doing something to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think there's the art, the art of applying all this. It's see again, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not saying passive things are bad. I'm just saying if you had a pie and right now passive modalities are 80% of your pie, and call it education is 10% and exercise and movement prescriptions is 10%. I'm just saying we should maybe think about shrinking the slice of passive modality, increasing the size of, say, call it the education, and then the exercise and movement prescription. It's just there's so many different ways we can help people and put effort into helping people. And I think you have to meet expectations, so part of it is doing what someone expects. And if someone expects to get some passive treatment, meet them there, but it doesn't mean you can't do all these other evidence-based things that could really be the things that are helping them more so in the long term, right? The
oh, for sure.
passive can help, in the short term, but long term, I often think it's more the information we give people, just telling them we've, ruled out something, or tell them, yeah, you're totally safe to get back to playing badminton, and it's those sorts of things that could help more in the long term.
Yeah, I think that too. The one thing that is important to understand when we're talking about like the passives, like the hands-on stuff, is there's many people and there's a large percentage of the population out there that is always going to have pain. Certain
Hmm.
people, whether it's fibromyalgia or an ME or long COVID or some type of systemic arthritis or whatever, name a bunch of different things, some neurological disorder. Like there's all kinds of different things and systemic things that people have, where they're always going to have pain, and maybe them coming in just for a passive treatment, as long as it's not under the guise of you're fixing them or releasing something or blah blah blah, as long as it's there as part of their management plan, I see that's something that as a profession we have a lot of value with. That might not be the same as if, like you say, you go to physio or a chiro or somebody else, where they're oftentimes either very quick or they're trying to make you do something, and maybe all you need to do is just like chill out for a bit, hang out with a therapist that you like in a safe, calm environment, and then they do something to you just to help kind of turn that volume down on their overall system. And like you said, it's very short term, but I think for some people that can be very powerful. It's
Hmm.
as long as it's not sold as like you need to do this or else you will fall apart.
Yeah, amen. Amen. Like, and I mean, that's,
Yeah.
the biggest, I have no beef with any modality, any intervention, nothing, depending on the narrative that's attached to it. If someone said to anyone, hey, I'm going to do this to you and I hope it makes you feel better, I'd have no problem with whatever that was, because about it right there. It's all about the narrative that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's something I always try and do in my courses too. Is I like we'll go through like I get them to do like the skeptical bit where I ask them, what things are you skeptical about? What things do you want to know more about? And I'll try and pull the research that I have on those things and be like, yeah, this doesn't work this way. This doesn't work this way. Blah 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 blah. And then I always like to ask them like, well, how would you describe this in an evidence based way?
Hmm.
It's not releasing this. It's not doing the things you've taught, rebalancing, whatever. And it usually comes down into kind of this like is this going to work for you? Does this feel better? Let's don't make anything up. This is just all symptomatic relief. And I think if we just keep it as a simple narrative that it's symptomatic relief and it might be short term, but that can be powerful in some people and sometimes it might not. But rather than
Yeah.
selling the fix, that's what I saw that all the time in clinical practice was people would come in and had seen dozens of other people or had been to seeing the same therapist for years or months, and they had been spent thousands and thousands of dollars
Mhm.
and weren't actually given a proper explanation for it. And I just felt that people
Mhm.
were getting taken advantage of, and that just always
Yeah.
drove me crazy.
Yeah.
Well-meaning healthcare providers, they just are missing the information. So that's why
Yeah.
people like you and I are out here, right? That's why we're yakking about this stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
A bit of an echo chamber here, but that's okay. Um,
Yes.
so here's the thing too is, I mean, this you probably have probably a simple answer, but courses like yours, right? You're
Mhm.
not selling a modality. You're not selling a specific linear approach. You're selling a knowledge or your process
Mhm.
or principles. I guess I should say process, principles and knowledge. Why do you think that courses like yours are probably harder to sell out than somebody that's selling like a certification program for a certain modality?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think there could be lots of reasons though. These ones say a passive therapy or a modality that's tissue based. They're pretty exact and definitive, which I think people like that. I don't think people like uncertainty. So these passive therapies that are being taught have a very distinct narrative that go with them. Here's what's wrong, here's what you're fixing. It's simple, and I think people like that. It's easier to understand. I think both clients or patients and practitioners love answers and love definition and exactness. Whereas sort of what my course is about, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's if you spend any time listening to the world's best in the MSK healthcare field, they all mention uncertainty. Uncertainty is rife in the evidence-based world because we just don't know why things are happening. That's why when someone goes to 8 different MSK practitioners about a problem, they usually get 8 different opinions of what's causing the problem. It's because no one really knows, you know. Um, the research says 90 to 95% of low back pain, which is the number one disability in the world, 90 to 95% of it is non-specific, meaning you cannot find out a true singular cause of a person's back pain. In only 5 to 10% of cases is there a definite identifiable cause of the back pain. So right there, you're saying, okay, the number one disability in the world, 90 to 95% of it, we don't know why that person has it. That's what the science says. It's uncertain. So I think that's difficult. That's difficult as a practitioner. That's difficult as the person with the back pain to not know. So I think that's a big thing that's attractive about these passive therapies that are being taught. It's like there's a system and a name and rules, and it's like this will fix people, and here's what you're looking for. And goodness knows it's very easy to find what you're looking for, and we all have it, but it's not necessarily a problem. Um, I think another thing might be that a lot of people don't know that we don't need to be fixing people. A lot of people might just not know that there's other ways of helping people. You know, a lot of professionals out there might think they do need to fix people. They do need to fix asymmetries, etc. So there might just be a lack of knowledge there. That's one that I've came upon recently when thinking about this. It's like, well, people might just not know. And they might not know that no matter the passive modality, it's helping people in the short term, but it's helping them not in a specific way we think. Once you understand that, well, then what's the point of going and learning a whole bunch of different passive modalities if they're all working about the same and it's not very specific? I mean, I guess if you're bored in what you're doing and you want something different to do, that would be why you might go. But, so I don't know. Those are some quick thoughts.
No, that's great, Parker. I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. But we have clinically, we get our confirmation bias. We
Yeah.
do something, people feel better, they report that we help them, and then therefore we like, okay, well, this works and this is why it works, right? So we often are like, well, we're taught this is the mechanism for this working, and then I do it and people feel better, and you get the, oh, well, I know it works because I've seen it work kind of argument.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's something that I really would love for our profession or anyone in the MSK world to just to stop and think, you know, about why their treatments are working. Are they working because the reasons you think they're working? Does it matter? Do you care? Sometimes people don't care.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just like, nah, whatever. I don't care. This works for me. People aren't complaining. They're getting better. And I think that's fine. And I would never say that that's necessarily a big problem. I would say it's a problem though, is if you're seeing people coming in again and again and again, and they are not getting better and they're suffering, and we keep on trying to um, reinforcing that, oh, it's because their back is out. And for example, I just was talking to a colleague the other day who told me a very sad story that her mom was just diagnosed with bone cancer. She has got a tumor in her spine, which is awful. And she's had pain for over a year in her back, and it started getting kind of some radicular pain down her leg. And she had been going to a chiro and probably some other people too, but definitely remember her talking with a chiro, and the chiro was like, "Oh, you're just out. You're out. You're out. And you need to adjust." And she was going in all the time getting these adjustments, right? Because this chiro was looking through things through a very specific alignment, spinal adjustment lens, and not this 95% of times where it's non-specific. There's the 5% of the time where it might be something serious. And they were looking at this, and they dismissed these ongoing symptoms because they had certainty with this tissue-based approach, and now this woman's cancer is spread. And you think, as a healthcare provider, that's not okay. To think in these very linear, fix-it ways. And as I love your concept of uncertainty, and I agree because I teach the same thing, and all the evidence says the same thing, is that we have this confirmation bias where we've seen something before. So I've had people with low back and radicular pain before, and I do this thing and they get better. So therefore, I must be releasing the tissue. I must be doing this thing. And when someone doesn't get better, it's because this area won't release or it won't balance or whatever. But what if it's not that? What if it is cancer? What if it is a fracture? What if it is some type of arthritic condition?
Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate worst case is what you just described, and I'm sorry to hear that. But I mean, these are the things we need to think about in practice. And what I said earlier about one of the main take homes is ruling out red flags. And part of that is a continual process of clinical reasoning. And if you're noticing something not changing the way you would expect it to, well, then maybe your radar should be going off and you should be considering referring on. So again, that goes back to that. Oof, that's bad.
Yeah, and that stuff happens, and that's the thing. That's one reason why I am really adamant about the stuff that I'm glad you're here to talk about your experiences and your knowledge and your course, and because that's something I'm really passionate about too. Is that there is these times where if we have these blinders on, we're only seeing things through one lens. We're seeing things through a modality or tissue-based rationale, and we're not looking at the bigger picture. We're not taking the zoom out approach like you talked about with the evidence-based, person-centered biopsychosocial. We're looking at the whole picture, because people, I like you said, people are unaware. I think that a lot of us are in our profession are unaware of the other evidence that's out there. And that's my experience I get too when I teach courses. I mean, I was recently did a course, well, recently as of when we're recording this, in Manitoba, and the stuff I was talking about was, and most of the feedback I got from the participants was like they never heard of this stuff.
Wow, yeah.
Why did they never hear about this stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where everyone goes to get their information, But I always put that back on the stakeholders as well, to be like, we need to get more of this information out there.
Yeah. Oh,
And
definitely.
it's because if your only source of information is taking a course to achieve credits, then are you really learning, or are you just satisfying a regulatory requirement?
Hmm.
You know?
Well, it'd be nice if you could do both at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be ideal, right?
Uh,
If your regulation requirement was consistent with something that, like, an evidence-based practice or something. So,
mhm.
but I guess that kind of leads me into another thing I wanted to talk to you about, which kind of leads on to this, is that, as massage therapists, at least in Canada, are we identify as healthcare providers, at least in the regulated provinces, we are considered that. But what's your impression? Like, do we want to be healthcare providers as a profession nationally, or do we want to be more service providers? And maybe what's the difference? What do you see the difference between a healthcare profession and a service-based industry?
Yeah, to answer the first part of that question, I'm not the person to answer. I mean, I'm only one professional in the profession, right? So I think you'd have to put some kind of poll out to have people answer that. I can't answer what other people want to be. I know personally,
Well,
I could,
let's be fair. What do you want? This is more about. I was
yeah,
just kind of seeing you go over
okay,
it, but yeah, yeah. Tell me your
yeah.
opinion.
I
Yeah.
mean, I obviously would, me, and I would like to be considered a healthcare professional. Um, you know, and I think, and this is the thing, we're sort of at a crossroads, or we're on a journey here where the evidence shows that regardless of your profession, some of the best ways you can have a positive outcome, clinical outcome, i.e., help people, is by forming a good therapeutic alliance, listening, validating someone's experience, you know, ruling out red flags, and then just again reassuring them they're okay and getting them back to doing what they love. And like when the science based, I mean, I'm kind of, you know, shrinking it, but that's essentially what it says. All these things we think we're doing to help people, yes, we're helping them, but not in the way we think we are. And so, we're all positioned, and registered massage therapists in Canada are positioned in a way to be wonderful healthcare practitioners who help people. Um, so I think it's more than sitting there. It's there. It's to be done. I think the tricky part is, you know, when you get into the whole regulation. I mean, a healthcare practitioner needs to be regulated by a governing body. And I think it's up to that governing body to do a good job of governing whatever the healthcare profession is. And I think a lot of responsibility lies with governments and their regulatory bodies that they create for healthcare professions. And so it's up to them to make sure the professionals are continually educating, and then to be continually educating with evidence-based material. So I think in Canada it could go a couple different ways. I mean, if it isn't properly regulated, whatever the profession is, then I don't think it could be called a healthcare profession, and you go more to a service provider. So I think a lot will come down to how it's regulated. I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of just, I don't know if I got my thoughts out very well, but
I'm sure it's great. I know I got you. I follow your discussion there, Marcus. I appreciate
yeah,
that. Yeah, the reason I brought that up is because I've been, in the last year-ish, I've been interacting with and teaching a lot more in some unregulated provinces
yeah,
across the country, and I made an assumption. So I made which, we shouldn't assume, but I made an assumption that, oh yeah, like, if you're an unregulated province, you want to be regulated, you want to be a healthcare
yeah,
professional.
yeah,
But what I've actually heard from a lot of the people I've interacted with in those other provinces is they don't really want to be. They're happy to
yeah,
be the way they are, where it's more a service, and they do get reimbursement from insurance and whatnot.
yeah.
And the reason being is that because once you put like a regulatory body, it creates the perception is it creates some barriers, I guess, because there's licensing requirements, so there's more dues to pay. There's your scope of practice changes, right? Like so for us in BC, we can't do like in terms of all the different things. There's a lot of stuff we can't do, which you can do in another province, particularly an unregulated province, in terms of like you want to do needling or cupping or
Yeah.
different things, which doesn't matter to me. And so that I think there's a worry that people might want to have that taken away. But I agree with you though 100% that I really strongly feel that our profession could, if it wanted to, could be like a mainstream like kind of healthcare profession. Like we could potentially work in hospitals or care homes or outpatient facilities, like where we have physios and OTs, because I think there's a real could be a real benefit for us. But in order to do that, I would say we'd have to be a healthcare profession. And I would say we'd also need to increase or change our education. And this is a contentious issue, which some people listening might be like, "Shut up, Eric." But I think I'm biased that we need to have a degree. Like we need to be a degree university-based program based on current best evidence, rather than a more technical kind of private school, which is just basically teaching you to pass an exam or to entry level practice type of stuff, which is like what's the least we can give you to put you out in the public, so hopefully you don't hurt too many people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that'd be great. It's difficult. I think that'd be great. Yes, no doubt. And the other side of it is I'm kind of a fence sitter myself, like Greg. You know, a person can get incredibly educated outside of their formal education. So I don't think base education is everything. I think so much of a person is their experience, but also what they do for continuing education on after their base education. So yes, I agree with you. It would be, I think, a smart move to make it a degree or a master's degree and go from there. And then I still, though, even then, like I'll pick on whatever physio. I mean, I still think they have a lot of room to grow in terms of better regulating what continuing education is out there, and there's just so much continuing education out there that's belief based and there's not science behind it. And it's not just in registered massage therapy, it's in all musculoskeletal healthcare professions. There's so much belief based continuing education. And I think all governing bodies should be doing a better job of regulating it. And I know it's costly, like so many things come down to financials. It's costly to regulate the continuing education, but I think it ethically would be wise and it's important. And I think long term, like I'm 44, I'm going to be around for a while longer. I think long term change will happen over time. We're too intelligent of a species not to create change and move in a more positive direction. I just don't know how quickly that's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely slow. It's glacial for sure. I do like the point that you said that your base level education doesn't necessarily make you a better provider or make you a better therapist, and you can get a lot of education without going through that formal route for sure. The thing I would, because like, yeah, you said physio is a master's, and in the States to be a physio, it's now a doctorate program, which is crazy. It's so much money and so long, yet the information they're learning is still not necessarily up to date. It's still a lot of belief based stuff, which is crazy to me that you could be in a university and learn a master's or get a doctorate, and it still cannot be up to date. Like I just don't understand that. And then but I would say that in the next evolution for our profession would be to get us into it would be better than it currently is right now. It wouldn't be best, but it'd be better than it is right now to get it out of the private colleges and into a more of a university setting. So people can learn that more. You can still do all your hands-on stuff. You can still have your clinical things, but it would be really nice to just to have future generations of RMTs at least being introduced to some concepts of uncertainty and being introduced to like critical thinking and being introduced to like here's some behavioral sciences stuff, here's some
Mm-hmm.
psychology, some sociology,
Mm-hmm.
just to plant some of those seeds of knowledge. I strongly feel would build even better therapists than are out there right now. At least
Mm-hmm.
provide that uh, platform for them to
Yeah.
grow.
Well, I mean, and then to take it further, again, I keep expanding out your questions or comments to
Great.
all MSK healthcare professionals, and in this case, I'd expand my next point out to all healthcare professionals, period. I think one of the very first courses that should be taught in every healthcare profession is, here's what the biopsychosocial model is. Here's person-centered care. Here's how to apply person-centered care. You know, here's basic, call it communication, human communication. So like these basic things, that all healthcare professionals should know at this point, that many don't because they were educated in the past when they weren't, this stuff wasn't there. In my course, I asked people, how many of you have heard of the biopsychosocial model? And I'd say, I'll be generous. I'll say maybe half the people have heard of it. And then I'll say, okay, of you who've heard of it, how many of you know what it is? And then of the 50% who'd even heard of it, only 50% of those know what it is. So 25% of people know what the biopsychosocial model is. And really, you know, every healthcare person in the world should know what it is.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I use something similar in my course. Because my main area of interest is in pain, and particularly, learning and studying and about chronic pain. And I often ask people, like, what's the number one reason why people go see a healthcare provider? And usually they'll say pain, because that's usually why people come to see us. Pain is impacting their ability to do something that's important. And I say, who here can give me a very brief definition of pain?
Mhm.
And then I usually get like 0 people,
Yeah.
maybe one person who's familiar with the IASP,
Yeah.
unpleasant sensory emotional experience. And then I'll say, okay, well, what is pain? Like, describe it in your own words what pain is, and I'll get any number of different things about it being, harm or nervous system or inflammation or whatever. I'll get all kinds of different things. And that always makes me, and then I was like, so does it make sense that the number one reason people come to see us is because they have pain or they're experiencing pain? Yet it's the one thing that we don't learn anything about in school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always like that kind of like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that. And so you said, yeah, people should biopsychosocial person-centered care. And I would add to that. I was like, we got to understand at least the uncertainty of pain, which is kind
Yeah.
of consistent with those things you mentioned too, because we know a definition and we can talk all we want about the nociceptive system and the neurophysiology and the cortical changes and but really what comes down to it is how is that impacting the person, which is the person-centered care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No, I think that would be a massive another, again, this is what I'm talking about. The classroom hours changing from being so much about what you do to someone and then onto these things like pain science. Again, you know, most programs cover pain science a little bit, but not nearly what they could or should, you know. Um, so here we are left to maybe learn about it on our own in our continuing education.
yeah, exactly. And the from some of the people I've talked to that work at some of the schools here in BC, I think the like their pain and stress course is something they get in the last term or two, depending on the school, and it's like 4 or 5 lectures, like 4 or 5
Wow.
like half days. That's
Yeah.
it at the end, which
Yeah.
makes no sense.
Yeah.
In my curriculum that I would give to a school, that would be like the first thing that one of the first things they would learn about, along with
Right.
biopsychosocial, all this other stuff that we talked about. So
Yeah.
anyway, in the perfect world, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Um, so the I want to ask you about the we kind of touched on briefly about people taking courses because it's mandatory or not. In your courses that you offer, in your experience, do you ever ask people if are they there just for credits, or are they there because they actually really want to learn something?
I've never asked that.
Oh, you
Um,
should. I ask all the time. It's
uh,
hilarious the answers you get.
Yeah. I I would guess the majority would be just they're doing it to get credits, I would imagine, but they were intrigued by my course description and were like, "Oh, I think this would be good to learn about." And so like I think there's probably a mixture of like curiosity and doing their credits in a way that they're interested in. But yeah, I would guess. What are the answers?
Oh, sometimes people will be like, I'm just here for credits. Some people will be like, most people are there, like same as answers what you just said is most people are there because they need credits and
Mhm.
this is something that interests them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm always curious that like okay, if I was offering a course and there was no credits, would you spend that kind of money and 2 days like on a weekend to be here? You
Mhm.
probably wouldn't get nearly the same numbers. You get some people, but probably not
Yeah.
as. And
Yeah.
this just goes to one of the things too. Yeah, I know here in BC they're changing the quality assurance program, uh, but I feel that when you make stuff mandatory, people are forced to learn, which is great.
Mhm.
But the uh, what you said before, which I thought which was really good, was there's not much regulation in terms of the continuing education industry.
Mhm.
Like people can basically teach whatever they want,
Mhm.
and I know that we will be moving towards a new system for Con Ed
Mhm.
where there won't be that approval process. But I'm curious what that's going to look like if that's just going to be a free for all where people can just take nonsense and because there's going to be less oversight I imagine over what
Mhm.
it is people learn.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
skeptical. I'm very skeptical about what that's going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I would say I'm probably even more um, pro accreditation, pro oversight of continuing education. Um, personally, I think all healthcare professionals should have mandatory continuing education because the science is changing all the time. So we need to change with it. Um, Personally, I can't rationally understand not having to get a course accredited by a governing body. I just can't understand that from a logical, rational perspective. You have professionals taking a course that is totally unregulated or not accredited. I mean, that's just wild to me. I just honestly don't understand it. Um, and I can only imagine it's because of resources, because the amount of financial and human resources necessary to govern a healthcare profession and overlook the continuing education of said profession. I mean, that's a lot of resources. So, um, but at the same time, if protecting the public's your number one mandate, shouldn't you be having a say in what the healthcare professionals are learning and hence then doing and saying to people?
I agree with you 100% there, Marcus.
Mhm.
I feel the same way too. I don't see how a profession can actually provide its safe, effective, ethical care, which is, usually that's the college's mandates, right? That's what they're here for, protect the public. I don't see how they can provide that when they're like, you can take whatever courses you want, and then you just have to justify to us why you took that and why it's important.
Mhm.
Without any
Yeah.
oversight. I mean, unless the colleges themselves are going to create
Mhm.
courses and
Right.
force us to take them, which we've experienced that before, and that's a little bit ridiculous. You know,
Mhm.
like we had to take a course on like having proper lighting in the room.
Mhm.
Remember that one?
I'm going to admit that I don't remember that, but
Oh, that was one of the ones we had to
anyways.
take a couple years. Anyway, there's been some weird ones, right? And we had to take a whole one on like hygiene, which is okay, great, I get it. But I mean, do we need to take a course on learning how to wash our hands and like do laundry and clean stuff? I mean, we all do that anyway, and if we didn't, then that's a problem, right? But yet they don't force us to take courses on like evidence-based practice or current evidence for low back pain or
Mhm.
whatever it might be, right? They don't force us to do things that actually are potentially more what we like impactful to our clients or patients every day.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see moving forward. I mean, call me an optimist, or like a silly optimist. I don't know the right word. It's escaping me, but I mean, I just hope in like 75 years that everything's moved into a more evidence-based, place. And it's not going to happen overnight. I'm just trying to do my bit and pitch in. Um, and I sincerely hope that in 75 years, we're in a much more, evidence-based, science-based place than we are today, which is heavily belief-based. And, I hope worldwide governing bodies sort it out and help steer things in that direction.
I'm an optimist too. I think I mean, sometimes it may come across as a bit cynical, but I think it's just after time you start to get a little frustrated when you see things move so slowly. But there's a lot of good, education providers out there like yourself and others that are really kind of challenging the status quo and trying to move that evidence-based needle a little further forward. So
Yeah.
I think, just as long as we keep doing our best to try and have these conversations and get this information out there, and
Mhm.
hopefully, enough people will listen, and hopefully some of the stakeholders will decide that, oh, maybe we should change things. And then,
Mhm.
I think that would be a sign of success. I think for us anyway. I don't know about you, but I'm
Yeah.
always excited when I hear a school or an association or a college, you know, changing things, and I'm like, yes, that's better than it was.
Yeah,
Keep it going,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And you always like to think is like, if it was, it's never just a single person, there's a collective, right? So there's a bunch of people out there, right, in the community that are having these conversations like we are right now. And if enough people listen, then change will happen. If we just sit back and accept the status quo, then I really do feel that the people that are going to get the be have the most harm are those that come to seek our care.
Yeah.
Right? We have an ethical obligation to provide evidence-based advice, evidence-based care, and a higher value care is really what the evidence suggests. Right, it tells you kind of
Mhm.
more about what's less wrong, and
Yeah.
uh, people deserve that,
Yeah.
specifically for spending good money.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I'm heartened, like, as technology advances, and, for instance, podcasts, as they just become more popular and more prevalent, I'm so heartened because I'm listening to so many podcasts from all over the world of the most bright, intelligent people who are full of passion and trying to move musculoskeletal healthcare in a more evidence-based manner. And it's just so uplifting and charges my batteries, to keep doing my little bit, and to contribute as well. And as you say, that swell will just build. I believe it will build eventually, and we will eventually sort of weed out or flush out the belief-based narratives will slowly disappear, and I think it'll get to a better place. It is moving in that direction.
I love the optimism, Marcus. So yeah, let's keep doing the good work you're doing,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your time and your thoughts.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed that. So thanks again. And if you want, can you just give everybody just how they can get a hold of you?
Oh, yeah. What's funny is I'd say I'm not incredibly amazing at social media, but I'm on there. Um, I'm on Instagram. It's just Marcus Blumensaat, all lowercase. Twitter's where I do a lot of getting research and interacting with people. There, I'm just at capital B. It's Blumensaat with a capital B. And you can always email me. Uh, hello@marcusblumensaat.com, and my website's marcusblumensaat.com, and that's where you can find out about my course, read my blogs, etc.
Love it. And I'll make sure to
And
put all that information in the show notes for
I was
everybody.
gonna say Blumensaat's not an easy name to spell, so I'd be appreciated if you could put it in there. Yeah,
Yeah,
cheers.
everyone listening, you got to check out the show notes, and I'll
Yeah,
have Marcus's
yeah.
contact there so you can get in touch with him if you have any questions or comments.
And thank you, Eric, for having me on. It was a privilege. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe so you can be notified of all future episodes. If you'd like to connect with me, I can be reached through my website, ericpurvis.com, or send me a DM through either Facebook or Instagram at ericpurvisrmt. If you'd like to get a hold of Marcus, he can be contacted through his website or social media, and those contact information can be found in the show notes.